Hello boys and girls. This video is going to be about putting fractions and decimals on a number line. The first rule that we have to learn when we are trying to work with fractions and decimals is that we need to choose, do we want to work with fractions or decimals? Because we know from our previous videos and lessons that they're actually the same thing. They're just different ways of calling the same number. Well, what we want to do is we want to work in decimals. And here's why. When you're working with decimals, you're always in tenths and hundredths. It's easy to say what your tenths are. It's easy to see what your hundredths are. When you're working with fractions, you might be in fourths, you might be in sixths, eighths, tenths, and twentieths. And it becomes difficult to make sure that you're working in the same parts. If you're working with decimals, you can always break your number line into 10 pieces and you know exactly where to put things. If you have one fraction that's in fourth and one that's in sixth, it becomes a lot more difficult to know how many pieces you need to break it up to. So the first step is to change all of your fractions into decimals. We're going to start with a nice easy one that it's easy to change these fractions into decimals. We already have this. How do we change 44 hundredths into a decimal? Well, we just write 44 hundredths as a decimal. It's the exact same thing. We said 44 hundredths, so we write 0 and 44 hundredths. Here we already have our decimal. Here we have 6 tenths. How do we write 6 tenths as a decimal? 0 and 6 tenths. Now, if I'm looking at this, I see I have 2 digits here, 2 digits here, 1 digit, and 1 digit. When I'm comparing decimals, I always want to have the same amount of digits. And remember that power I gave you? Magic 0. You can always add zeros to the end of your decimals to make them equal. So then we would write our number line. All of these decimals have a 0 in the ones place, so that means they exist between 0 and 1. And since I'm working with decimals, I know I get to break it into how many pieces? What are decimals always? Tenths, hundredths. So I'm going to break it into 10 pieces. When you're working like this, don't get caught up on if my pieces are exactly the same size, as long as they're sort of the same size. And always check to make sure that you have the right number of pieces, not lines. Remember, we're dealing with the pieces on the number line, not lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I need one more line to make a 10th piece. Now, I'm between 0 and 1. So what would I label this first one? It's 1 out of 10. So that would be 1 out of 10. How do I write that as a decimal? 1/10. And then that should help you see 2 tenths, 3 tenths, 4 tenths, 5 tenths, 6 tenths, 7 tenths, 8 tenths, 9 tenths, and 10 tenths, which would be whole. Now, I had 2 digits, 2 digits, 2 digits, 2 digits. I don't have 78 anywhere on my number line. Do you remember your magical power? You can always add a 0. And as soon as you add a 0, you should easily be able to see where those go. That becomes 10 hundredths, 20 hundredths, 30 hundredths, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, and 90. And now I can see that my 78 hundredths would go here. My 44 hundredths would go a little bit up over the 40 hundredths. My 40 hundredths would fall right on there. And my 6 would fall right there. So here's this on the number line, this one, and 60. Then if I were to ask you a question like, which of these numbers is closest to 0 after you've made your number line, it would be very easy for you to see that this number is our closest number to 0. So as a review, we change our fractions to decimals. We make sure our decimals have the same number of place value. We create a number line broken into 10 pieces and either label it with 1/10 or 10/100, and then we plot our numbers on the number line. Now let's see what happens if I give you one that is only plotting one number on a number line, but has a whole number. Say I want to plot 1 3/4. Where does 1 3/4 exist on a number line? Is it between 0 and 1? If I count 0 and 1 with my fractions, am I going to have 1 and 3/4? Is it between 1 and 2? If I count from 1 to 2 on a number line, will I see 1 and 3/4? And that is where it exists. I know it exists there because I have 1 and some more. Not another whole because that would take me to 2, but I have my 1 and a little bit more. Remember, our bottom number tells you your total number of pieces that you need to break into, and your top number tells you what you have. So how many pieces do I want to break in between 1 and 2? Your denominator tells you. 4. 4 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4. So if this is one whole, this is 1 and 1/4. This is 1 and 2/4. This is 1 and 3/4. And this would be 1 and 4/4, because 4/4 would be your whole, which would make 1 and 1, which would be 2. So 1 and 3/4 would exist right there on a number line. I'm going to go through another example of that. What if you were asked to put 1 4/5 on a number line? First thing that you ask yourself, what does it exist in between? Hopefully you recognize that it exists in between 1 and 2 because I have 1 and something else. A way to remember that, 1 and 2, 1 and something else. Both times I said 1 and. I didn't say 0 and, I didn't say 2 and. I have 1 and something else, so that exists between 1 and 2. How many pieces am I going to break my number line into? Where do we get that from? Our denominator, that's our total. I need to break it into 5 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And how many am I going to move over? How many do I have? That's our numerator. That's how many I have. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right there. This is 1 and 1/5, 1 and 2/5, 1 and 3/5, 1 and 4/5, which is what I wanted to find. 1 and 4/5 on the number line. It's between 1 and 2. 1 and 4/5. So that's how we put fractions and decimals on a number line. Don't forget to review this video as many times as you need to. You can even create your own. Try to make sure, bring them into me and I can check them for you. Thanks for watching, boys and girls.